Welcome to our Melbourne Catholic website, and a special welcome to His Eminence. It's Cardinal Orlando Quevedo of Mindanao. And Your Eminence, welcome.
Thank you very much.
It's lovely to have you here in Melbourne.
Yes.
And we're looking back on a really interesting week where you spoke to people here in Melbourne on a range of topics. But let me start with you. I think you're an interesting topic. You labelled yourself a servant, and people have looked at you as someone very much in the likeness of Pope Francis. How do you describe yourself?
Well, simple. I don't demand too many things. I am very informal, and I like to be with people.
And I think from what I've read, people like to be with you. And you now are over 50 years a priest.
Yes.
Around about 3 or 4 or 5 years now as a cardinal. I read about your mass where you commenced this wonderful part of your life. How has this few years been as a cardinal?
I think my activities have been tripled, and I'm going in and out. I belong to a congregation called the Oblates of Mary Immaculate.
Yes.
And when the priest described me, I am out more than in. Who am I?
I understand. So you talked this week, or last week as it is now, as people watch our chat, you talked about Catholic social teaching.
Yes.
On one of the evenings. Just in a small few moments, can you give our viewers a little bit of an understanding of what you see as the relevance in 2017 of Catholic social teaching?
Well, my special topic was Catholic social teachings and interreligious dialogue.
Okay.
And I 3 parts of that. The common basis for interreligious dialogue with Muslims.
Yes.
And the experience of interreligious dialogue in the Church of Asia, and then my own personal experience of interreligious dialogue in Mindanao, and particularly in my own Archdiocese of Cotabato, because my Archdiocese of Cotabato is about 47% Muslim. And the seat of the Archdiocese is a city called Cotabato, where the officials are Muslim officials. Very few Christian officials have been elected.
I see.
It's predominantly Muslim. 62% of the population of the city is 62% Muslim.
So trying to, I guess, give a quick description to people watching this who maybe like me, don't have much of an understanding of the Philippines. I was interested to read that Mindanao is somewhere near 30 million, of the Philippines 90-something million. It's obviously a huge, it's got a bigger population than Australia.
Yeah, 100 million plus in the Philippines, Filipinos, and yes, about 30 million in Mindanao.
And I was interested to read this long-running conflict and your view that the Muslims have been unjustly treated over a period where people moved in, some Christian, to, if you like, take over the area, try and maybe Christianise the area. But you've in fact been a voice saying a lot of that was very unjust and remains unjust. Tell us about that.
Well, to me, from study of history of the Muslims and the Christians going into Mindanao, I believe that the root of conflict in Mindanao is social injustice, injustice to their self-determination, injustice to their identity as Moros, and injustice to their economic development. And I explained this in a paper that began to be circulated even by government among themselves. And I still believe that. And to solve that problem of Moro rebellion would be to provide some sort of self-determination within the limited territory they had. They once ruled all of Mindanao.
Yes.
They had sovereignty over that. Their sultans even went up all the way to Manila. And when the Spaniards came, 200 years after Islam arrived in the Philippines, they found 2 Muslim kings in Manila. And later on, they were conquered by the Spaniards, and they tried to conquer Mindanao, but they never did until the Americans came.
So have you, in a sense, been somewhat of a lone voice in terms of proffering that point of view in a largish Christian area?
I think deep down the Christians know the history.
Yes.
But their history, the history of that they prefer, is to go back to the 1900s and not to the 14th century when Islam came. In the 1900s, the waves and waves of migrants from the north and the Visayas went down to Mindanao because it was the land of promise. It was opened up by the government, and before that by the U.S. government. And gradually the Muslims began to retreat into this area, which is now only 5 provinces out of the many provinces in Mindanao. And they wish to have self-determination, some sort of self-determination in that area where they predominate.
So how is progress in that very interesting area?
The peace process is going on.
Yes.
Between government, and it has been going on for at least 17 years. But now they have the government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, one of the mainstream Moro liberation fronts. They have come up with a proposed basic law that would govern that small area of the Philippines. I mean, it's area of Mindanao. And it will be submitted soon to the president.
So do you see some hope?
I think so. And the president has enough clout over Congress, both Senate and the House of Representatives, so that they will most likely vote yes to that proposed Bangsamoro law.
So before we talk a little bit about the inter-religious dialogue that I know is a favourite topic of yours, can I just ask a personal question?
Yes.
Because I read, obviously Aquino has come in after Marcos. Can you tell us about both of them? I know Aquino thinks you're wonderful. Well, that's what I've read. Are they very different people? I know obviously they've got very different perspectives.
Yes.
Just give us a quick summary.
Aquino and Marcos.
Yes.
Okay, Marcos is a distant relative of mine.
Oh, okay.
But I was the rebel bishop. They called me my rebel relative. But certainly the record of Marcos in the first few years of martial law was very good. But as it was lengthened many years, corruption took place, and a dictatorship evolved.
Yes.
And so a lot of human rights violations took place. Among many, my own church in the Diocese of Kidapawan, it was called the persecuted church, because many of my lay leaders were either detained or tortured or disappeared.
So are we talking here the 80s and the 90s?
That would be in the 80s.
Yes, okay.
80s. I was a bishop there for 6 years. And while on the other hand, the mother of President Aquino, who is the first one to be president after martial law in 1986, she's the icon of democracy. You know, although she was not, she was a president only for a few years, she restored democratic rights and human rights were. But I think there was a failure on land reform.
Oh, I see.
Land reform.
And is that where we're sort of going now?
Yeah, it's going on, and that land reform is still a problem.
She's a much-loved figure around the world, really.
Iconic
yes,
figure.
I would agree with that.
And her son became president until the last election. There's only one term for a president. So he finished his term, and another president came, that's President Duterte. Yeah. And there are also similarities and dissimilarities between Marcos,
I was going to say.
Aquino himself.
I wasn't going to ask too much about the current president because I'm not a fan, and I think a lot of Australians maybe are not. And we're on a tight time frame.
Okay.
So let me come back to interreligious dialogue, and particularly something you talked about last week in terms of migration here into Australia. And it seems to a lot of Australians that the Muslims, probably quite unfairly, are being really marginalised. Can you just give us a bit of an overall perspective of what you'd see going on here in Australia, as much as you're able to understand it?
I'm not much aware of Muslims coming to Australia. I'm sure there are. Australia is a promised land for them. It's a land of a better future for their families. I'm more aware of the situation of non-Moro Filipinos. And a long time ago, there was this problem with the mail order brides.
Yes.
Yeah. And the first time I came, I had an occasion to talk, I think, with the Prime Minister at that time on this problem.
I see.
Yeah. And I think the Bishops' Conference of Australia also was aware of this.
Right.
Yeah. And so I think there are some discrimination. There were some discriminations at that time against them, racially. But I think I'm sure that there has been a lot of improvement, and you see Filipinos hired at higher levels of employment in government and in education and in companies. I have some relatives here who are engineers, because many of the Filipinos who come here are well educated and qualified.
The Filipinos make a wonderful contribution here in Melbourne and to Australian society, without a doubt. But it's interesting you talk about the mail order brides. That's something that sparked my memory. It goes back quite a long way, and you don't hear a lot about it anymore.
Yeah, no more. I think I think there is a better relationship between Australian men and Filipino women.
Yes.
And they go there. Now you see them retired. Maybe they were mail order brides before, but they're retired and they are living in the Philippines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And hopefully having a happier life.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, if they retire with $2,000 every year, every month, you live like a king. In the Philippines.
One more question about the Muslims, because you've lived a lot of your life working with them, trying to help them. And while you said perhaps you weren't right across the Muslim situation in Australia, how are you seeing the spread of Islam worldwide? Some of it, in a terrorist sense, is concerning to a lot of people, but obviously also very, very good people that you're working closely with.
Yes.
How do you sort of work that through?
Well, they're very religious people. Most of the people I know, most of the Muslims I know, very religious, very good people, and we mix freely with them among in the grassroots level, markets, schools, work, young people, and especially even in a Catholic school like Notre Dame University. But I'm disturbed a little bit by the profiling of Muslims, because as soon as you see someone with a veil or someone who dressed up as a Muslim, you begin to have suspicions in your mind. No? Where did he come from, and so on and so forth. So I'm a little bit disturbed by that, and it's not Australian only. It is the Philippines, and it is in Europe, where migration is a big problem in Europe. And in the United States, I saw a Muslim being searched very thoroughly, and she was a woman. There was a police woman, immigration officer who was a woman who was doing that.
Yes.
But I saw her. I was in line, and I saw her just brought to the side and then brought to and was examined like that. I think there are many things like that happening.
Sounds like a classic case of discrimination.
Well,
the way you've described it.
Yeah, it's a selective type of examining someone entering the United States.
Well, people are saying what a wonderful job you are doing in these really critically important areas. Can we have one last final comment about Pope Francis, who you are compared to, which must be quite a wonderful compliment?
Well, I'm very happy that he is such an approachable, humble, simple Pope, soft-spoken, and I worked with him for 4 years in the Vatican.
Yes.
As we were both elected to what is called the Ordinary Council of the Synod, and there I met him at close range. He was a new cardinal then at 2001, 2004 years we worked together. And even though he spoke a little English and I spoke a little Spanish, we mixed very well during coffee breaks, and it was very, very happy.
Well, I hope it was a lovely trip to Melbourne. We're delighted to have you. Cardinal Orlando Quevedo of Mindanao. And thank you very much for giving us some time. It was lovely to meet you.
Thank you very much, Sharon.
Thank you, Your Eminence.
Thank you.